You know what they say. Desperate times call for.
Two immigrants with a lot to say.
We've moved countries, started new lives, and guess what?
We still don't have it figured out.
Job hunts, survival hacks, and the life choices that we probably shouldn't admit publicly.
But here we are.
If you've been there or you're there right now, then this one's for you.
This is Desperate Times.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know us at all, Sakshi and I have known each other for almost a decade at this point. And let's tell you a little bit about how we know each other. Sakshi, do you want to take it over? Where have we met? Just let's introduce us from that point.
Sure, yeah. And we've known each other for a long time. I think it's been 8, 9 years. We
Mm-hmm.
met during our undergrad days, which was back in Mumbai, India. We studied hospitality. Some of y'all may know that, but most of y'all might not know that since a lot has happened since then. Wouldn't you
Yep.
say, Varun?
Oh, absolutely. We've gone from being two hospitality students to being two people in marketing right now. So, if anything, that talks about a career switch for sure. But before we get into all of it, Sakshi, how did you land up getting into hospitality? What's your story? I know I have mine, but what's your story?
Oh, well, it's actually not that interesting, but I wanted to do management. So that was either business management or hotel management. And seeing as I did not get into the business schools that I wanted to, IHM Mumbai was doing the entrance exam, which I had given, and I got in. Funny story is, though, that after I got into IHM Mumbai, did my admission, I received an email from Symbiosis saying that I was taken off the wait list. But
Ah.
I was 18 years old then, so I was like, you know what? Let's not do it. We've already taken the admission here. Symbiosis would mean moving to Pune, so we'll just
Mm-hmm.
stick with it. Um,
Fair.
so yeah, I stuck with it, but not really. So that's my story, Varun. Do you want to share yours?
Yeah, sure. So, in some ways, a little similar, as you mentioned, like everyone always has a plan B that they kind of go with because let's be honest, we're talking about us being 17, 18-year-olds. We don't exactly know what we're doing, and most people don't, right? So for me, I knew I had a little bit of a creative flair, and I was always like conflicted between if I want to do something in marketing, which would have been going towards a mass media kind of a degree, or if I wanted to do hotel management, which was just something that I had interest in. But how I landed myself in hotel management is slightly different from your story. So I did give the entrance exam as well. And to my surprise, I got a rank that was extremely good, which put me in a tougher spot because that made me think that I should go more towards hotel management. For me, being an 18-year-old who's grown up in Mumbai all my life, switching cities was not something I was ready for. So for me, it was either going to IHM Mumbai or figuring out my seat in BMM. Here's where it got tricky. I got accepted both places. I got into IHM Mumbai. I also got accepted into a few colleges that I applied for mass media. And then I was in a spot where I didn't know which one I wanted to do. And what kind of tipped me over to getting into hospitality, simply, honestly, the rank that I got. Because with the rank being that good, it just made me believe that I guess there's something here for me to do. And that's how I kind of landed myself in there. But as you mentioned, shortly after I realized it's not something I want to do as a career, and the backup option that I had is something that I am pursuing in some capacity, at least for now. So that's where it was for me. But how did you land up eventually making the switch? Jumping conversation a little, but how did you eventually realize that hospitality is not for you?
That's a good question. And I feel like in our regular conversations too, like we're always jumping conversations. That's just the norm these days.
Yep.
But our program has like a 4 month vocational training, they call it, but it's essentially just giving you like a taste of what's in there for you. And let's just say it, I did not like that taste. 4 months in a five-star hotel in Mumbai, switching between different departments like front office, housekeeping, food and beverage service, and kitchen. Some departments I liked, some I
Mm-hmm.
did not. And because you had to do the 3 year bachelor course, right? Like, I mean, I guess you could drop in between and then switch, but then that's a whole different ball game.
Mm-hmm.
But while I was in there, I realized that it's not for me. There was this one department that I thought I could do, but eventually I was like, you know what? If there's sales and marketing opportunities within hospitality, I would be more willing to like step into that area.
Mm-hmm.
So we have campus placements in the third year, and I was only giving interviews for sales and marketing, which,
Mm-hmm.
mind you, were lesser than the other departments that they
Oh,
wanted to
much
hire
fewer.
from.
Much fewer for sure.
Yeah, so that's kind of my story where that 4 months sort of gave me an idea where I realized that this isn't for me and I should look at sales and marketing instead in hospitality. So, not a complete pivot, still in the industry, but not doing the core, I guess, the departments that are there. So, yeah,
But
that's
you
my story.
but you did work with hotels for a while, right?
Well, I did get a campus placement in the third year for management trainee sales and marketing at the Radisson hotels,
Mm-hmm.
but that was in Agra, which
Mm-hmm.
is stark different from Mumbai, and I couldn't sort of adjust there. So I would say I
Fair.
was in that position for about 7 to 8 months. It wasn't like I couldn't adjust there. I think I was doing okay. My mentors were great. The directors, they were my mentors, but then the managers who had sort of risen through the ranks did not like it that after 1.5 year, a female coming from Mumbai would just get
Mm,
an assistant manager position. So that they were bitter and
yeah.
they did not make it pleasant for me.
Oof. Yeah, that's a tough spot to be. But yeah, I guess it's a good thing eventually you kind of found what you did want to get into, I guess.
Yeah, I would say much later, going through the pandemic and a few other things, but we'll get into that later. And first, hear about what threw you off from the hospitality industry, Varun.
So my experience was in some ways similar, but actually a lot different from yours, I would say. Because
Mm.
what kind of happened for me was that while you were lucky enough to get a campus placement, I was not in that spot. I went through the spot of going through bunch of interviews and everything getting extremely close and then just not landing it at
Mm.
some point in time, which then made me get to a point of question if this is something that I do really want to do or not. And I landed up just getting off the campus situation and like trying to find jobs by myself. And the opportunities coming my way were, let's just say, not the best at all. I did get
Mm.
one offer from a five-star hotel, and I was looking at offers for the front desk. I did get an offer, but the kind of salary that I was being offered, honestly, was way below what could be considered
Yeah.
something to live off in a city like Mumbai. Sure, I was living with my
Mm-hmm.
parents. I had the luxury. I didn't have to pay rent. I did not have all of those burdens that I would say I have today a little bit. But I'm just going to name it out. The salary that I was getting was 14,000 rupees. An offer like that kind of put things into perspective for me, where I started questioning and realized that if I want to work in hospitality, I needed one of three things. I needed good money, or from any job from that point of view. I needed good money, I needed respect, or I needed work life
Mm-hmm.
balance. I needed one of these three things at least. And for me at that point in time, hospitality was just not cutting it. There was no money that I was getting in there. Work life balance is negligible. Let's face it, we've
Oh
all been there.
God,
We've all kind
that's
of
a whole
had
different story.
anyone who's been in hospitality has worked banquets and knows that that's just not happening. Work life balance just does not exist at all. And respect, at least from an Indian market point of view, is was just not there. So because these three things were not working out for me, I realized that hospitality is not something I could do. And that's when I kind of realized that it's time to pivot to sales and marketing.
So, Varun, you mentioned that you got into sales and you were looking for things off campus. So, where did that land you?
So I did land an opportunity at Zomato, which was one of the bigger companies in the food, in some way still in the food and beverage space, but not directly in hospitality at all. And I gotta say, the job was well paying. Like that's something that worked out there. So when I was looking for those three things that I needed, at least one of those three options or one of those three criterias were being fulfilled. But getting into sales and 6 months of it as a 20 something year old, as a first jobber, even for that matter, pressures were high. Sales targets are never easy for someone to be chasing. And that's just something that I tried really hard for 6 months. And I realized that it wasn't a space for me. And that's kind of what eventually took me to realize that sure, sales is making the big money, but it's not creatively really fulfilling me in any capacity. And if I really wanted to seek that creative fulfillment, is when I had to eventually make the pivot to marketing in some capacity. And that was definitely not an easy one for me. But Sakshi, how did you pivot to marketing? What exactly did you do for it to finally pivot? Because I know you and I have known, as I said, each other for like 10 years. I know you also have got eventually some agency experience. How did you really land up making that pivot to marketing? And is there something more about your first job that you want to talk about?
Well, I feel like everything for me was kind of connected. Because being in that hotel, I was in the sales and marketing department, the management trainee there, and I was shuffled through room reservations, catering sales, room sales, which meant corporate. While I was good at it, is what I was told by my mentors.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't particularly like it. Like you mentioned, like it didn't have that creative aspect. And I've always been a creative mind, like right from my childhood. I used to
Mm-hmm.
go to drawing classes at the age of 3, and I continued that until like 13 or something. So, I
Okay.
mean, yeah, there was some creativity there. And I feel like growing up, it transformed into creating creative ideas for marketing campaigns and like social media posts. So
Mm-hmm.
I did have to take a 3-month break though after this first job of mine in Agra, because let's face it, the pollution in some of the states in India is quite high. And coming
Mm-hmm.
from Mumbai, I wasn't used to it. So the winter took its toll on me. I came back home, took like a break for around 3 months. And then a friend of mine said that there was this food and beverage startup that was looking for someone to do sales and marketing. And they
Mm-hmm.
actually meant the and marketing part, which most jobs do not mean. So I joined that place. It was like proper startup feels, like everyone was doing everything, but I learned a lot on that job. And the founder there, he actually let me run the social media and marketing campaigns, which meant even like flyers at some point, and the social media channels and even WhatsApp marketing. So I got to do a lot of things which gave me hands-on experience, but there was little work-life balance.
Mm.
So, and traveling in Mumbai, it used to take me quite a bit. Eventually, I decided that it was time for another switch. And this time I was looking at hospitality brands that had
Mm-hmm.
marketing positions because I was still in that niche.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a job Jan 2020, which is basically just before the pandemic hit us.
Oof.
Um, yeah, at a restaurant in BKC, which
Mm-hmm.
was great. The people were lovely. The job was amazing. I learned a lot of things there, did some email marketing too. And it was a Spanish restaurant, so I got to eat a lot of nice food for
Nice.
staff meals. Um, but the pandemic hit us, and the
Mm.
hospitality industry was the first to be hit, I would say. So the restaurant shut without any date of ever opening again, no schedule, no future dates. And we were just waiting for the pandemic to be over, waiting for the restaurant to start again. But as it seems, it shut down permanently, moved locations from Mumbai to Goa. And while all that happened, I was looking for jobs, applying anywhere and everywhere, which then led me to my first agency gig at the end of 2020. So
Oof.
that's like a whole mixture of how, where, how that switch happened.
Mm-hmm.
And we can obviously get into more details later, but
That, I
that's
mean,
where I'm at.
one thing you mentioned and one thing that I can relate with is getting good food. That's one thing I never had short. When I was even working at Zomato, that's one thing I never had shortage of. Every place I went for a sales pitch, those guys made sure that they had a lot of food coming my way for every single meeting. So I never had the shortage of any food or really good food at any point in time. But you also mentioned about the 3 month break that you took, and I have similar experiences with career breaks at some point in time. Was it extremely draining? Was it just you applying every single day? Was it you taking time off? What was that?
I don't think I was actively applying then. I actually cannot really remember that period that well, but it was mainly just me chilling and figuring things out because that experience, my first job, just shook me so much that I had to make some decisions about
Hmm.
what I wanted next in life. And I guess, Varun, you've had a similar experience.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. For me, the break was actually a little longer when I took a break after my first career pivot. So, as I mentioned, I started off with sales and eventually realized that sales was not what I was looking at from a long term point of view, at least not as someone who was a 21-year-old back then. And the break for me, it just went on and on. It went on for almost 6 months, I believe. Sure, I was applying for jobs here and there, applying for different internships here and there because it's not easy to kind of break into marketing without any educational background or past experience. But those 6 months were a lot of reflection and just making sure that if I'm pivoting again for a second time out of hospitality, I know what I'm doing. I know that I'm looking at something that does fulfill me from a career point of view, from a creative point of view, from a financial point of view, from everything that I was looking at, because I realized that while I got the money in the previous job and I fulfilled one of those three criteria that I was initially looking at, that hospitality wasn't fulfilling, it just still wasn't cutting it for me. So those 6 months that I kind of took off was a lot of reflection, a lot of just sitting back, figuring out everything from a mental health point of view, from just what do I really want to do point of view as well.
So, Varun, you mentioned that you had a period of reflection for about 6 months, which then led you to that agency gig. So,
Hmm.
what did you do in those 6 months that got you that gig? Is my question.
So apart from a lot of self-reflection, I just got to a point where I realized that things were not going to move after a point without someone really referring me in. And luckily, I was in a spot where I did have a friend who was working at one of the very big agencies in Mumbai, and they landed up referring me into that role. Now, even with the referral, I'm going to state this out for anyone who's watching. It's extremely important to have a referral, but at the same point in time, the referral is not going to be the end all be all of it. There are going to be situations where you're going to be asked to prove your metal as well, which I was also asked to do before I got that agency gig. I was in a situation where they asked me to do a small assignment for me to land it. But with that being said, don't work without referrals. A referral is not gonna, without a referral, you're not gonna be able to move the needle as much as you think you will. So if you know anyone out there in your network who can really refer you into some job, even if it's someone not at the highest position in there, it can work. So just seek for referrals and something eventually will move for you. Before we kind of wrap this up, Sakshi, is there some one piece of advice that you have for someone who would be looking for a career switch and how they should really navigate it?
So, one piece of career advice to like switching careers, I would say, is having multiple interests and what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you have one particular thing that piques your curiosity, you should have like other minor interests as well. And then try those out too. Because sometimes you feel like, okay, this is going to work and I'm going to love it, but then you don't end up liking as much. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe that other thing you thought that is okay suddenly becomes, oh my God, this is amazing. This is what I want to do. So, trial and error, I would say, is the conclusion to this.
Sakshi, I think that's a great piece of advice that you've given. Having major interests and minor interests is definitely something that people should think about when they're looking at career switch. And I feel like from our point of view, that's how we kind of rounded up what a career switch is and how one kind of navigates it. But we want to hear from you what you're most interested in.
So, tell us in the comments what you want to hear from us in the upcoming episodes. We'd love to hear from you. So, that's it from us on Desperate Times. We'll see y'all next week.